I've talked at NAPCO a few times before. You maybe have seen this slide. I just wanted to kind of remind everyone the BayRICS Authority is a 12-member joint powers authority that covers the Bay Area. Members are 7 counties in the Bay Area, the 3 big cities, and groupings of smaller hub cities in the East Bay and South Bay. Our purpose is to really oversee planning, funding, policy, and operations of regional public safety radio networks. We have been focused, and we will continue to focus really on broadband for public safety and the rollout of the FirstNet nationwide public safety network, which should happen over the next few years. But we also deal with some coordination of our various radio systems in the Bay Area, specifically the P25 subsystems. The Bay Area made a decision years ago to develop what we call a system of systems approach. We don't have one system, P25 system, that covers the entire Bay Area. Each of the counties, and in some cases a couple of counties, have gotten together, have built their own systems with the understanding that these P25 systems are interoperable and that the systems should be able to support radios moving across systems and operating on other agency systems. So the BayRICS has a standing committee called the Technical Advisory Committee, or TAC. We have several members of the TAC here today, including Michelle and Shelly, John Lemon. I may be missing some others, but we get together monthly to do research and to make recommendations on technical issues related to not only broadband and FirstNet, but also the P25 and the interoperable radio systems, the talk group, the regional talk group fleet map guide, and other guidelines such as the system key exchange guidelines that we've developed for the region. We have also developed an advisory group of representatives of the 7 P25 systems that are either built or being built or in the planning stages across the Bay Area. And this group meets on a monthly basis as well. We approve updates to the channel guide, the fleet map guide. We develop guidelines such as how to share keys across systems. We have an open forum every month just to allow these operators to exchange information and share stories, which is, I think, very helpful for those agencies that are building systems right now. And we have just recently conducted some interoperability tests as a part of the 2015 Urban Shield exercise that is conducted with Alameda County and all of the other, many of the other agencies in the Bay Area every fall. So let me just get right to the test. So we felt like we needed these tests at this time because we had a couple of systems that are complete. We have a couple of systems that are partially complete but are actually operating on a limited basis, and we have a couple of other systems that are just getting ready to get built. And we wanted to make sure that our understanding of how these radios can be programmed to operate across systems was accurate. And so we developed, as part of Urban Shield, we developed 41 separate radio tests across the Bay Area. San Francisco, Marin County, San Mateo County, Santa Clara City and County, and Alameda County, which is part of the BayRICS network, all participated in these tests. And these 8 agencies basically tested really a couple of different things. One, they tested, for example, whether or not Alameda County's radios will work on the Santa Clara County system, whether San Francisco's radios would work on the San Mateo County system and the Santa Clara system. So we wanted to test moving the radios across systems. We also tested the coverage of these systems in terms of how much they overlapped each other. And we determined that there is a lot of overlap of these systems, which is a really good thing for redundancy, for fail-safe, and that type of thing. So we got some really good results on both of those sides. The test locations, I apologize for this rudimentary map, but it was the best I could come up with. We had 3 basic activities for the test. The first activity, we tested Marin County's Marin County has a 700 megahertz conventional tactical channel system, and Shelly will talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But we tested that with San Francisco's radios to determine, to make sure we had the channels correct and the programming on the radios would work for San Francisco radios to operate on the Marin system. The second activity was also with San Francisco, dealing with the BART underground 800 megahertz P25 network and some ISSI technology that was going to connect back to San Francisco's dispatch. Michelle will talk a little bit about that. That was conducted in 2 underground BART stations in San Francisco. And then the third activity revolved around the Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, and really was where all of the participants got together to test their radios, both on the partially constructed Santa Clara system and on other systems that has coverage in that area. Let me back up and quickly explain where the P25 systems are built and where they're being built and where they're still being planned. So I don't know if this has a so Contra Costa and Alameda County have a system called a BayRICS, which you're probably very, very familiar with. It has been built and operating for a few years now. Santa Clara County is building a system currently. They have a couple of sites, maybe they have the third site up now, I'm not quite sure, but they do have coverage, live coverage around the Levi Stadium area in the Santa Clara Sunnyvale area. San Mateo County has a P25 system that they've just recently completed. San Francisco has a 700 megahertz overlay system that they are using right now until they are able to upgrade to a full 700 megahertz P25. And then Marin County is really in the planning, maybe right past the planning stage. In a little while we'll talk a little bit about where Marin and San Francisco stand. But that's kind of the layout. We do have coverage from the Santa Clara system, from the San Mateo system, and from the BayRICS system, all in that Levi Stadium area, which is right there. And as you know, Super Bowl 50 coming up, that was another reason we wanted to focus on the Levi Stadium area to really understand what kind of coverage and what kind of capacity we had for mutual aid and for radio interoperability in that specific area. In addition, I will say San Francisco made tests along those red lines as they drove from San Francisco down to Santa Clara to see what the coverage was along that peninsula corridor there between San Francisco and San Jose. The results, we were very happy with the results. Over 90% of the tests were successful. We did have some tests that weren't successful, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But even more important than the tests themselves, we learned a lot about the radios and how they needed to be programmed. We did have a couple of issues with programming that we were able to actually resolve, most of them while we're in the field. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we will be publishing a full report on this so you can get a much better picture of all of the tests, where they were conducted, and how they turned out. Hopefully that report will be out within the next week or so. So that's the idea, that's the concept. I think now, before I go there, I'm going to turn it over to Shelly Nelson, and she's going to talk a little bit about the activity, the Marin test, and then Michelle and the chief will talk about how San Francisco worked with all of the other agencies on the tests. And so now I'll turn it over to Shelly.
So Barry wanted us to give you a little bit of an outline of how we got to, as far as Marin, where we're at and how we got here. Back in 2008, 2009, we were working with UWASI, the funding source, to try to get funding for our P25 trunk system. Well, because the North Bay has a different risk assessment, the funding wasn't what we needed to make that happen. So with the help of the other North Bay counties, Sonoma, Napa, and Solano, we were able to piece together several grants to put in the first California conventional 700 mutual aid system. So we were the first one to get the national tactical channels put in. We have 9 sites put in, all 32, I think it's 32 channels, the national mutual aid channels, built in quadrants around the county. So we have that, it's very robust. And we are now, in November, we got a ballot passed for a parcel tax to build our P25 700 system. Yahoo. It was hand counted 760 some votes. I'm not kidding. So anyway, but we're on a roll. We're in the middle of, we've contracted for a project manager to help us put the RFP on the street. So we're hoping by March to have the RFP on the street for a full-blown P25 forklift. So now back to the test. So we could not really play in the trunked arena, but we wanted to test the 700 conventional. So San Francisco volunteered to use their manpower, thank you, Chief, appreciate it, to come across and test that. And it went very, very well. With Michelle's help and getting all the dispatcher information together and everybody and the gentleman coming across the bridge, they tested the 700 mutual aid. Not only did they call on the calling channel, but then they also used tactical channels as they moved along, coming into across the bridge, into Marin, down into the Larkspur landing area. And yes, there was some digital sounding. There's coverage issues, but with only 9 sites, you're going to have some of that. So we would just tell them 3 steps to the left, and it would work okay. But I think there was only one place that we didn't have coverage, and that was right below the bridge, I think, on the test. So it did really, really well. So if you're coming to Marin, bring your 700, make sure the mutual channels are in it, because we can talk to you. And the dispatchers, all 6 dispatch centers monitor the calling, 7 call 50, 24/7. Okay? Any questions on that test? Did I miss anything?
And we'll have an opportunity for more questions at the end of the entire presentation. But if you have anything specific for Shelly now.
Yes?
Do all the dispatch centers have the capability of activating and deactivating the repeaters?
Yep. They're not, they call for it. It's not live. Okay. Yeah, Kelsey, yeah. Just checking, yes. It's in the knockdown state until you call for it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Shelly.
Do I need this?
Yes.
Dan wants you to have it.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So I'm Michelle Geddes. I'm the project manager for the 800 megahertz radio replacement project in San Francisco. And we really took this time to test out new radios that we were deploying throughout the police department, the fire department, and the sheriff department. So what we did was we took 15 radios and got them programmed on the various systems. I need to be louder?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's
Just for the
further.
recording.
Oh, for the recording, excuse me. Okay. So we did these tests with 5 radios from each of the various disciplines. We actually brought the fire radios that we used, and I'll just touch on each of the tests. So like Shelly mentioned, we started off and we drove up to Marin County, and the 7 call 50 tactical channel has very, very good coverage. And so for us, it was nice because we were able to, as we were leaving our San Francisco EOC, we were able to get on the channel right away and start the testing into Marin. And so sort of in an operational scenario, it's helpful because, as we're deploying police or fire, they can, even while they're in San Francisco, they can begin talking to the dispatch and get the assignment of the channel. Question out there, how many have switched to digital? How many are dealing with digital? Yeah, there's not very many. It's going to be a learning curve for our end users. A lot of the tests, it's, the dispatcher and the end user were saying, oh, it's digitized, we didn't quite hear you. So it's a different training for the ear that we're going to need to be cognizant of as we start the migration, and we noticed that specifically in the Marin testing as we drove up and we're talking with dispatch. What else do I want to say about Marin?
The tacticals had a little bit of a problem depending on what they picked, what
Right.
mountaintop,
Right.
and that's a learning curve.
As we did the call in on 7 call 50, and then the Marin County dispatcher enabled 2 different tactical channels that we then did tests on. I will say it's a little challenging for the end user to navigate to the right zone and find the right tactical channel. So we're going to need to learn, sort of streamline that as we kind of continue using these tactical channels. It was a little bit easier as we did switching to the talk group and doing the zones of the different East Bay zone and the SBRCS zone and the San Mateo zone. Those are fairly straightforward to get to, and then the interop channels are
Show your cheat sheet or later.
yeah, actually you want to pull up
Yeah.
the cheat sheet. So what we did was we've created these cheat sheets for police, fire, and sheriff that gave, this is fairly straightforward. This is just how our radio is programmed. But if you go to the next slide, Barry, this is really where, it's basically like a phone book, right, that we've had to get the group familiar with. So the 700 tactical channels, they're all towards the end, the last 2 zones here. And so with the user had to turn the knob and then zone up, zone down, or channel up, channel down to get to the right channel. And we had to try a couple different channels in Marin. But once we got the hang of it and we knew where to go, all the tests were successful. So I would say Marin went very well. The next test we did, actually before, but the other test we did was with BART. And I'll touch a little bit on BART. So what we've done is we implemented an ISSI link between the city's P25 radio system and the BART underground radio system. And we established 6 interoperability talk groups above ground on the San Francisco system, and we've linked them one for one to the interoperability channels that are below ground in BART. So the theory is that if you take your radio and you go underground, as you start going below grade, you lose coverage above ground and you get onto the BART system. You actually have to turn your knob to the BART zone. Which is problematic and is something we need to fix. But for the test, you turn your knob to the BART zone, and then you are able, on 6 of those interoperability channels underground, you're able to talk above ground in San Francisco and then back to dispatch. And so that was the test scenario that we wanted to run through. We tested the day before the yellow command tests, and seemingly everything was working. The day of the test, we had challenges. The link, what we believe is that the link was down, so we weren't able to. We could communicate amongst ourselves on the radios below ground on the BART interoperability talk groups, and we could communicate above ground on the San Francisco interoperability talk groups, but we couldn't get that link. So there was a problem with the ISSI connection the day of the test. Again, problematic. The ISSI link is what we're sort of counting on as we migrate over to, fleet-wide in San Francisco. We're relying on the BART link to our link to be on and redundant and highly available at all times. And so this was sort of a lesson learned for us, and we've started the discussions with BART on how we can improve just monitoring the link and making sure that it's up and operational. And it's really all about working with the staff that maintains the system and making sure that they're comfortable with the messaging and the alarms and just running through those tests more frequently. So BART was where we had our challenges on the tests, but the various P25 systems worked, but unfortunately the ISSI link was down. And then the remainder of the tests, we took the group from San Francisco, and we drove basically down the 101 corridor. We stopped in at SFO, and we tested the East Bay system, the San Mateo system, and the Santa Clara system. And I will say the East Bay system has phenomenal coverage. You can pretty much get the East Bay system all throughout San Francisco, and then down the peninsula. So I don't know about those contours, how that got approved. No.
They stop right where the computer says they stop.
Right, exactly, right. So a very reliable East Bay system. But we were able, pretty much throughout the peninsula, there were some slight instances on 101 where we had scratchy coverage, but we actually were able to get the San Francisco's interop system down all the way down into Santa Clara. So we did the radio checks with us, basically on the field users, and we communicated back to both San Mateo's EOC, I believe is where they were running their tests out of, and then the Santa Clara, I don't know where Santa Clara was running their.
It was a city.
It was the City of
dispatch.
Santa Clara Dispatch Center.
Yep.
And so, can I put you on the spot a little bit? Okay, so, so I really wanted to make sure that the end users knew and understood this test. You know, we've been working with our P25 operators group and developing the Fleet Map Guide and doing the system key sharing agreement, and it was all sort of within this, 10-person techie world, right? We tried to work really hard in San Francisco to get the end user involved so that they understood the concept of the new zones and the interoperability talk groups and that sort of new functionality. And so, I don't know, Chief, you want to touch on just a couple of things that you noticed with the test? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I'd say, Michelle is very thorough, so I guess I'll just do stories. But the first thing that I'll notice was with the digital sounding of the system. And one of the things that happens is we work in the same office building, me and Michelle, and whenever there's a greater alarm fire, I always turn it to the TAC channel. And I give her the radio and I say, listen to this. And she's like, I can't understand anything that anybody's saying, but every firefighter can. So I'll tell you that the day we switched to digital from conventional, or analog, thank you, she's going to hear thousands of complaints because it's just going to be off a little bit to the people talking and burning buildings through Scott masks. And it's just going to be, but I think really it's just going to be something that the firefighters or police officers just got to get used to. But just know that there's going to be thousands of complaints immediately because it just sounds a little bit different and you're just used to it sounding one way and it changes. So that was the first thing I noticed. The second thing was I was very impressed that the digital system for San Francisco worked at Levi Stadium. That was kind of a surprise. Our analog system did not. So, but we were able to talk back to dispatch from the EOC at Levi Stadium. It wouldn't work as we went into the stadium too far, but from the EOC we had good retention. And then the other part is the switching of channels. So I know the firefighters love working with the engineers because they always tell you, oh yeah, it's really easy. You just click this button here and you push this button 32 times. And then you change this button to here, and I could talk on the BART system. And then of course I come to the engineer and I put a turnout coat on him and a Scott mask and I put this on the inside. I go ahead, push that button. So that's been the big challenge, and I have to say that Michelle and her team are very patient with the police firefighters and the sheriffs that are assigned to her in dealing with what we want is very, very simple to what the engineers and all the features they give us. So BART, we keep wanting the holy grail of, I want to turn my radio to A6 and I want to walk down and I want it to work above ground, below ground, in the Transbay Tunnel, anywhere that you want. And trying to make that happen through ISSI, I think is the very big challenge that's facing us right now with BART. One of the things that I had to do for this test and in explaining it to my boss is when he was a probie, he was dispatched to the Oakland Hills fire. And that was before firefighters had radios, only the officers had the radios. And part of the exercise was, well, what would you do today? How would the communications go? And so we had to go and interview firefighters that went there, and that was in, 89? So that's, yeah, so that was in 1989. And what we found out is the communication was the good old-fashioned, you grab a line, you go over there, and we'll holler at you. And there was an Oakland firefighter supposedly assigned to our 10 engines that were there who we couldn't find, and pretty much it was just word of mouth, and you guys go up that street, and if it gets too hot, you go up the other street. So part of the learning curve for the fire department has been, we can operate in the East Bay, no problem. If we know where to turn our radios, we have 6 channels. We could operate, we could communicate amongst ourselves, or we can use the talk around channel and just communicate. And then hopefully with patches, we could communicate to whoever our liaison would be. So those are my thoughts.
But just to follow up, without the ISSI though, you need to have those patches, or you need to have something else to be able to talk back to your dispatch.
Yeah, presently we do that with kind of like the Greeks in a marathon. So there's runners. I mean, that literally is how it works. Is our people go underground. We have one channel that works sometimes. Most of our communications underground is going to be using talk around, and then we send a runner back to talk to command. I mean, our policy would be command should be at the mezzanine level if it's not smoky. So even if the ISI doesn't work, when all the BART companies have the new radios, we could operate entirely on the BART system and not go above ground. And then for whatever medical channels that we need that have to be above ground, we could just patch those in just from console patches.
Right,
So
right.
that's kind of the way it is now. But it's all line of sight. BART is, since I think it was 1974 that the captain from Oakland died, they put the radios, they put the phones. So there's the blue light stations in BART. So that's the other way that we would communicate is one person with a radio stands at the blue light station, and that phone is hooked up to the command post outside the BART stations. So there's a command post at every BART station in San Francisco, and we test those monthly. So, and they usually work. I didn't have any questions yet. No, go ahead.
Are those dual band radios?
Those are dual band radios. Our Chiefs have tri-band radios.
Is VHF on the other side?
I'm sorry, these are only 700, 800.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Chiefs
The Chiefs have VHF.
VHF in it.
AM2, okay.
Yeah, so
So that would give you more of that flexibility, especially on the fire side.
actually the Chiefs and the officers in the southern part of the city, they operate, they help in fire calls in San Mateo County, Daly City mostly. And Daly City uses VHF. So the Chiefs and the officers have, is it dual band or tri-band?
I don't know.
They have
They
VHF
have
capable.
the
They have
VHF
VHF capable radios, and they know the procedure to talk on them. Hopefully it works. I mean, there was a fire out there the other day. They said there was no problems. I didn't hear any complaints. So
Good.
One other thing to touch on, Barry, can you go back to the cheat sheet, yeah, with the zones. So the one thing, for those that are familiar with it, so we've created these interoperability zones. So across the top, right in the middle, towards the right-hand side here, we have a SF interop zone, we have a BART interop zone, San Mateo, East Bay, and South Bay. And so every single one of those systems have these 6 interoperability talk groups in them. And getting that word out is where we are right now. We know, we internally, the technologists know that we have this capability, but the end users are still learning about it. And I will say, we ran this yellow command drill, and it was very successful. The very next day, the San Francisco Fire Department ran a separate exercise called Red Command, and they used the P25 capability, but they used East Bay talk groups that unfortunately weren't the interoperability talk groups. And so, had they known more that we had these interoperability talk groups, and that they were patchable and available at dispatch, we could have much more seamlessly ran the Red Command, because the Red Command, they patched an East Bay, Alameda County, Fire 1 talk group to a Coast Guard talk group and to a Santa Clara talk group. Thank you. So and it was very difficult to figure out. I mean, we were in the. It was not really working. It was scratchy. But, you know, had they done the ICS 205 ahead of time, we from San Francisco Dispatch could have very easily patched to the Coast Guard on the 700 interop channel, and then that is basically available down the bay. And so it could have streamlined that operation. So just getting the word out that these are available is sort of where we are now, and you know, we have work to do on that regard. So, yeah, Randy.
Did you have a chance to test the emergency button for underline?
That would be me.
Yes.
So we were told not to press the emergency button. So I went to Santa Clara and pressed the emergency button, and it worked, and it confused the Santa Clara dispatch. And
Yeah.
sorry, Barry.
No, that's okay. That's
I will
why.
say, so on the BART side, though, it wasn't.
That's why
We couldn't link to San Francisco Dispatch. Once we realized, okay, we're not linking to dispatch, that piece was missing. We didn't test the emergency button. It has been tested, and I know it works, but it wasn't working the day of the tests because that link was down. But it does work on the BART side.
Through the ISSI?
No, if you switch to the BART zone,
Just switch it.
and then you're operating it, it goes to BART dispatch.
I'd like to add one more thing.
Yeah.
This fleet map that Michelle's speaking to, there's been a lot of work put into it, and the fleet map guide, we've taken the future into consideration. There are IDs set aside for federal and state. There's also, you know, we've got different counties that we've left room for everybody to be able to use this. It's not just a Bay Area. If you want to take it and add yours to it, we can do. Okay, I'm standing. But it's a growing, living document, and we've taken everything that we know and left room for growing. I think we've left room for the state in there too, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so.
There's room for IDs and things like that for ISSI down the road. So systems, it can grow. So if you want it, Michelle, Barry, and I all have it. So just let us know.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and Shelly and Chief. I just, well, I'm going to wrap up. First, I wanted to actually offer Aaron Miller from Motorola to, did you have any comments or thoughts, or did anyone have questions from a technical side on the Motorola radios or systems? That we do have a technical expert here from Motorola. You may not have questions now, but you may think of some later. But did you have any thoughts on any of this?
No, the only.
You have to stand up and use the
Sorry.
microphone.
Stand.
You're getting us trained. We'll have this down by the end of the.
Yeah, the
session.
only thing that jumped out at me was the what is implemented right now in the San Francisco system with BART is ISSI.1, the previous release,
Yep.
and that's why the manual roaming is required. That was the first iteration of ISSI in the P25 standard. So going forward, obviously, we're working hopefully to implement an ISSI 8000. So that it can make it a lot more seamless for the users as they go forward, right? Which is what the chief wants, right? Is you want to be able to go into onto the other system, roam automatically, and not having guys fiddle with buttons when they're and knobs when they're, you know, in those life and death situations. So that was the only thing that jumped out at me, and that's obviously something that Michelle is working on to make happen. Are there any other questions other than that that I can answer? No, then I will turn the mic back over. Sweet.
Besides the fleet map that we'd like to make available to you, with Barry's guidance, we've worked through the governance of a system key sharing agreement. It was very hard. So if you don't have to start over and you'd also like to look at that, what we worked through, please you don't have to recreate. We're willing to share that information also with you.
Great. So I will open it up for other questions in just a minute. But just to kind of wrap up the whole testing piece of this, we don't have anyone here from Santa Clara or Alameda County who was involved in the test, but I just did want to add that both of those jurisdictions brought in radios and tested both the home P25 networks and their network themselves, and the results of the tests were really good. I think I mentioned we had about a 90% success rate. If we had discounted the ISSI, it probably would have been more like 98% or something like that. Most of the tests were successful. A little bit on the test criteria. We were not testing the quality of the audio. So if we got a usable sound from the radio, we considered this a test a success. We do, as kind of the lessons learned coming out of this, we do understand that we need to do follow-up tests. And we need to spend some more time on audio quality and this whole question of digitization. We also need to do tests where we have the end users more involved, both to make sure that they can understand how the radio works from a hands-on perspective, and also to get them conditioned, I think, on the difference in sound quality. So I think we will propose more rounds of these types of tests, but more on the operational side to getting the users more involved. I think we did miss an opportunity with that Red Command. We could have done a little bit of that this time around, but Urban Shield comes up every year. We can do it again next year, and we can do some tests between now and then to work on that. And then Shelly already mentioned it, but the other thing that came out of this is that our regional coordination efforts are working. We have this group of folks that get together every month. We use those people to both help us keep the fleet map updated and to develop these key sharing guidelines, and both of which were very important to the success of these tests, and they work. But the key is, they're, like you said, they're living documents. We know that they're going to be refined. We will add systems and add agencies to the guides when they come online, and so we know we have to keep that dialogue and that monthly forum open to allow us to address those issues. It gets, the Bay Area is a complicated place anyway. And when you see this, you understand, this is not simple stuff. This is stuff that takes some work, and it takes work to keep it up from the radio tech side, and it's going to take work from the operators to understand, what this means and how to make it work. So we've got a lot of work still to do, but this is a great first start. And I think the concept that we have a series of mutual aid talk groups that will now work anywhere in the Bay Area, on any radio, on any digital radio, I think that's a tremendous benefit to the Bay Area, and it's something that I'm really proud to work with the radio people and the technicians and the folks who made all this work. I'm just a manager. I just kind of make sure they have the meeting rooms in place and get together at the right times. But it's a really good work. And so at this point we've got plenty of time for more questions. If anyone has any, I'd be happy to answer. Yes, Randy.
Is it safe to assume that none of the top groups on this particular cheat sheet, I only use this because it's up there, it could be any of the systems that were tested, I guess, so they're not encrypted, right?
Correct.
No.
They are not encrypted. That is a bone of contention with, I'll say, so as we're working through Super Bowl 50 operations, our very specifically our San Francisco SWAT team would like encrypted talk groups with the FBI SWAT team, and we're exploring the ability to do that. And then we also are exploring, the San Francisco SWAT team has also asked for capability to talk in the East Bay on encrypted talk groups, and so that would be something too that we're going to want to look into. But it's not in the model today, but it's sort of our next iteration of this would be to add that capability.
So if I may, my thoughts about that are, based on past experience, it is a really crucial decision, I guess, in terms of the planning and setup. Or do I need to stand up?
Or at least you can capture your question.
So what we did years ago with the military, exactly same scenarios, just different players. They're military rather than first responders. They did dedicate, I believe, it was 2 or 3 channels, or in this case, talk groups, for encryption. So it'd be, I believe, at that time they did, for example, 1 for each discipline. So the majority of the channels or talk groups were clear mode because all of the SOPs require it. They mandated, actually, mutual aid channels. However, there are situations where encryption is warranted. So, yeah, that's why I was curious about it. I missed a few meetings.
And I'm just going to run around with the microphone so we can at least hear the questions.
My question's for Aaron. The chief was complaining about not being able to change channels, like going from, say, BART up to the street level. I've seen on previous versions of Motorola speaker mics where they've had toggle switches, push buttons that would allow to switch between 1 and 2 channels, and that would seem it would be fairly easy on the programming, deciding to switch between, say, the next 2 channels. So if they programmed it properly, they'd be able to, downstairs, push the button, they're on BART, come back up, push the button. And because the speaker mic sits outside of their turnout. And is that something that Motorola can do currently, or is that going to be an SP?
That is It's a very good question.
Look that way.
That's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I do know that some speaker mics do have a knob on them, but I don't know what capabilities they have as far as being programmed, right? If it's a 1-channel bank or there's specific channels associated to it. That's a great question.
This would have to be something where they switch, it'd be things like for the BART situation.
Well, that's
upstairs, downstairs.
Right, and that's what I'm referring to. I do know that there are Motorola microphones that have a toggle switch on them, but I don't know their capabilities, and I don't know if Gordon or Rodney know this as well. I'd have to look into that. If they're tied to specific channels, you can program on those, or if they're tied to a specific channel bank. And I don't know if that's, because what I've seen in the past is they were tied to the zone on your radio that you were on, so that would not be a benefit necessarily.
So you have to basically set up a certain program
Right.
zone to be able to do that.
Right. Yeah, I'll dig into that. If there's something unique that I'm not aware of, I'll send that out to the group. So.
Other questions?
This is more of an observation, but giving a user a 1,000-channel radio is great if you're an engineer, because I love 1,000-channel radios. But the time to learn that template is not when there's a black smoking hole in the ground, but it's long before that. And one of the things that is a real problem is that us engineers, and I'm definitely one, love new toys and 1,000-channel radios and all that kind of stuff. But training is really an issue, and it's a huge cost. And the problem is you can get a grant for a $1 zillion radio system with all the fancy toys, but not 1 penny for training. And that is an ongoing thing. I learned in the Naval Service, very much like the Fire Service, that training is your job, and every once in a while you land an airplane or put out a fire, but the rest of the time you're doing drills, and so when things happen, you know what to do. And I think that's one of the things that the organization needs to keep pushing for is funding for training. And the last NAB show, I was at a presentation with the Emergency Alert System with both FEMA and the FCC, and I asked the FEMA guy, I said, why is it that you don't have any grants for training? He goes, well, because we're focusing on equipment. I said, great. So somebody buys a system, yet they don't have a penny to train the people, not just on the first day, but over and over and over again. So that's one of the things that politically, and again, I say out of politics, I'm an engineer, but Politically, we need to find ways to have training so that all the users know when something bad happens, I need to go to zone 6, channel 32, and be able to do what I need to do. And until we can get the training for that and the funding for the training, we're going to continue to have these problems of too many channels that nobody knows how to do. So I think that's one of the things that we need to really focus on, is not the technology, because that's pretty well off the shelf. It's how to keep everybody who uses the radios knowing how to do it.
Good point.
I'll just add to that that the firefighters are compulsive trainers. When anybody had an appointment with a firehouse and they aren't hooked up to respirators, blowing smoke in each other's face, they train, they drill, and I'm sure the police departments do the same thing, but I agree with Bill's comment that the focus is on the equipment and the administration of the procurement and the organization and how well and how much coverage there is, and all that is super important. But once all that's done, keeping the end user informed about the evolution of that list and how to manipulate it is key. Find the money for that.
We can't agree more. I think we're all on the same page there. Fortunately, Alameda County has a very great regional training center, and there is the framework in place to develop some really good trainings for this. Just hasn't quite happened yet, and that's something we need to work on.
I'll also add, in San Francisco, we have the same concern in San Francisco just on training, and what we've actually done is done online interactive video training, and so that's actually significantly, is what we're finding, lowers the cost of having to pull people out on overtime or that sort of thing. But they have it, in the police department. Our plan is to put it on all the desktop workstations at the police stations. For fire, we have the training facility, and then it's also available on their station computers as well. So it's a constant refresh as well.
I was just going to ask you, do you think it would be advantageous to the end user if you had a D zone available on this cheat sheet?
Let me let the experts answer. Oh, can you elaborate on?
Yeah, they know where I'm going with this. In order to help the new user or the end user, Harrison, our new radio, created an A, B, C, D switch on the top of the radio. So you can now go 4 instead of your 3 zones. You could have 4 for 60 or 64 channels accessible on the top versus 48, just for operations like this.
But Dan, that's 60 channels more than most people can understand.
Any comments on a D zone?
I'd rather have the same issue.
Yeah, I guess I'll say something. So, and one of the things is there's always, thank you. There's going to be always complicated, whether there's a D zone or an E zone. There's always going to be somewhere in there. And one of the things that I have tried to stress, and we're looking at, is making the complicating factor happen at the dispatch center instead of at the field user. So most of these talk groups are on consoles or at dispatch centers or however they do it. And I'd give an example. Remember there was that family that got swept away in Ocean Beach in San Francisco? And we spent 2 days looking for them. So what we had done is our chiefs have a different one because they have VHF, and there's a Coast Guard zone. So what I could do is I could talk to my people who were in the water, and then I could switch to the Coast Guard zone, and I could talk to the Coast Guard zone. But what we tried to do, and what we did for that incident, is we took the A bank, so we took, I think it was on A7, and we took A8, and we patched that to the Coast Guard channel, so they're just next to each other. So the complicating step happened at dispatch instead of to the people in the field. And the more that you can have the person sitting at a computer, hopefully in a calmer area, and I know 911 centers are not calm areas, than at the beach or at the fire scene is, I think, the route that we're taking in San Francisco.
And so to echo what the chief said, what we've done in Marin County is those conventional channels the dispatcher can patch any one of those channels to any talk group that she has on her console or he has, and they have multiple folders to do exactly what he's saying right there. And then as Mira comes up to the 700 P25, we will do that same sort of thing to take that changing of channels for them away so they don't have to, as much as we can. They'll still have to do some, but we're trying to do that as much as possible.
Any more? Well, thank you all. We had fun doing this, I know, and we appreciate you listening. I did want to actually have one last shout out to Bob Simmons with CDX Wireless, who has actually helped us immensely with developing some of all of our policies and procedures, pretty much. Thank you, Bob. These things right here are really put together with Bob's help. And yeah, right. That's right. You get the credit or the blame, depending on right.
Just keep it up to date.
No, it's great work.